Welcome to the Hessian Scrum podcast. I am Raphael, the editor of the Hessian Forum website, and the very special guest we have today is Eero Pöyry from the band Skepticism. Eero, thank you a lot for joining us today.
Thank you for the invite. It's great to be here.
Good. So I know that Skepticism has just released an album recently, and you also started doing some concerts. How was that when going?
Well, in a bigger picture, we got the album out about a week ago. Now, at the time of recording this, uh, all this year, 2021, we've been kind of going through the 30th anniversary of the band, which has been great in a sense, as it has been really slow on the live show front because of the pandemic. There has been time to reflect to what's happened in the past years. So in that sense, we've only had like one show, which was a week ago, the release show of the album. But in addition to getting the album out and other activities, we've had the time to kind of look back and think of how things went in the past 30 years. And as a process like that, kind of simultaneously creating new things and looking back in the past, it's been quite a fascinating year, even if it has been slow on the live performance side.
Okay, so and what about you talk about this reflection? Where has this reflection taken you? So are you satisfied with the past history of the band?
Yeah, there's no kind of single or striking conclusion in that, but kind of personally, I've been really happy with all the things we've got to experience. So, for example, starting to play live shows again after not doing that in the 90s. In 2001, we went back to playing live, and that was clearly a major good step for the band. And the kind of the shows we've got to play in several countries, the great bands we've got to share stage with, that's something kind of unique in life in general. So basically, that to get to experience that with your own music, it's something that kind of now that we've got to experience that, I won't let go of that easily. So that's been clearly one of the highlights, kind of both the shows themselves and then also those great bands and events and crowds we've encountered. So that's clearly been one. Also, something we've discussed and mainly I've kind of concluded in my head is that for us the band is a kind of a lifestyle. It's something we've been doing for 2/3 of our lives. And personally for me, the important part is that it keeps going. So in a sense, as we are in a niche genre, it's actually been good for us in a sense that there has been enough success for the band so that we've got the albums and live shows going. But on the other hand, we haven't been so successful that it would have required more than was easy and convenient to deliver. So basically, many more popular bands end up in difficult discussions like there's a 2-month tour. How do we do it? Do we have to quit our day jobs? And we never had to have those difficult discussions. So in that sense, kind of for me the goal has been to get to create music the way I best like it, so kind of from a strictly personal point of view. So for that purpose, how we've done this so far has served it pretty well. So those are kind of two angles of many that have come up in the past year.
So it's interesting that you bring up this question of the reflection that has been going on with you and the band, because I think that's a good theme for our discussion. And in that sense, I think it would make sense for us to go back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
So you initially joined Skepticism as a guitarist, right?
Yeah.
And
True.
I'm interested about how did you get there? Like, how did you first get interested in metal music or in music in general, both as a listener and starting to become an actual musician?
Yeah, maybe my path to that wasn't the most common one. So I wasn't into music as a child so very much, but then something happened in the late 80s, early 90s called underground death metal. When I heard that, I was kind of blown away. Like, this is absolutely devastating stuff. And I happened to have some friends who listened to that stuff, who would take the train to Helsinki to buy vinyl records and then record them to C cassettes and share them. And I got to that stuff via those friends who, unsurprisingly, uh, two of whom are in the band. So the thing was that we were listening to that music. The guitarist, the drummer, started a band. They were looking for kind of more established musicians in there, and they kind of tried a couple of people there, but they couldn't quite find the kind of players they wanted. Um, and then at some point, I got interested in playing myself, and I started playing. And these friends of mine thought that, well, this guy could be the kind of guy who would stay if he joins the band, because they kind of wanted stability into the lineup. So then I joined the band after just having started to play. So I had little experience in the actual playing, and the kind of the first couple of months in the band, the guitarist Jani made tablatures of the new songs by the band, and I practiced those at home and just kind of attended the rehearsals by listening. And then at times we started to play those songs with just me and the drummer, and then eventually, after a couple of months, I was kind of fully in the band. So basically, those guys thought they wanted me in the band more of because who I was than kind of how I played. And kind of if their idea was that they want to get someone who will stay in the band, they did it pretty well, I must say. And then also it wasn't so different from that how we find the singer. We just knew this guy from our school who had a really strong and loud voice, and then we just went to him and like, well, hey, we need a singer, how about this? Yeah, so that was that. Uh, it was kind of the thing I mentioned as the first thing is that the kind of for me the death metal of the early 90s was the thing that I really got into, and because of that I was kind of course as a teenager very extreme in the thought. So I thought anything with a clean vocal is crap, and it has to be brutal death metal like this and all that. So it was fun and interesting. And luckily, we lived in a small town called Riihimäki, and there were a lot of underground metal gigs going on in that very town, because there happened to be this guy who organized them, and we got a huge privilege of kind of just walking to a place in the town and get to see these kind of big names of the underground with demo tapes and even 7-inch vinyls out. So there was Sentence was playing there, and Xysma and Disgrace, and even Dark Throne after the first album played in Riihimäki. It was completely kind of a when you look at those gig posters nowadays, it looks almost kind of unbelievable that those shows would happen, and they were in our hometown. So kind of it was really great to get the perspective. Like when you learn your stuff, write your songs, you can end up at that stage and maybe even get a vinyl out at some point. So kind of it was painting the path for the young men really well.
Okay, I think it's nice that you mentioned this early fascination with underground death metal, because indeed
Yeah.
that's how Skepticism started as a death metal band, right? But then it became something very unique. So can you talk about how did this transformation take place? Like, did you feel like death metal was not enough? Like, it could not accommodate what you wanted to express?
Uh, well, kind of looking back, it just feels like when you start playing an instrument, you start as a band, it's highly unlikely that you would come up with something unique as the first thing. So of course, uh, we would buy all those death metal albums and listen to them and kind of think that's cool. Let's do something like this. And the early songs were something like that. And even our first release, where I still played guitar, the 17-inch vinyl from '92 was quite death metal-y. But kind of once you got through the first hurdles, kind of how do we play together, how do we write songs and all that, then you'll naturally start thinking of kind of then, okay, this is how you play metal, how would we be us? And kind of interestingly, after the first release, we had a bass player for that release, and he left the band. He stopped music as a whole, and at that point we need to think of kind of do we get a new bass player from somewhere? Does Matti, the singer, start playing bass while singing, or should I move to bass and whatnot? And we ended up thinking kind of, okay, then what would be the kind of sound that would be ours? So kind of something that we would feel would be our own thing and represent kind of our vision for music. I was personally interested in keyboards, especially the pipe organ. Of course, pipe organ isn't something you can buy and bring to rehearsal, but the sound was something I always liked. So then we, of course, being those extreme, 16-year-olds, and we weren't quite sure whether you could do credible underground metal with keyboards. So I borrowed a basic keyboard and I took it to the rehearsal room. We improvised a couple of songs with the drummer, and kind of what if we didn't have that kind of a thin background pad keyboard, but it could be something like this. And the other guys liked that, and we decided that, well, okay, I'll drop guitar, I'll move into keyboards. Um, then, as I used to be the second guitarist, how I would play the keyboards was pretty much like playing the guitar. So it wasn't a background instrumental, but instead it was kind of even next to the guitar, and that's kind of that shape or what shaped our sound for the coming couple of releases. So that was the basic thing, that we have keyboards and guitar. A couple of new steps after that were taken for the kind of sound of our own to be fully formed. One of them was, for example, that the guitarist plays with two amplifiers, so it could be distorted and clean, or double distorted, to kind of make the sound wider. That's one. The drummer moved to playing with mallets instead of sticks, so there's a bit more dramatic sound. There's no snares in the snare drum, for example, and the cymbals sound somehow really nice and soft with the mallets. So that was that, and then with the keyboards I got bass pedals there as well. So replacing the bass player person, we now have the kind of the low end of the spectrum is handled by the pedals on the keyboard. So those were the kind of elements that we slowly discovered. Not everything in the first year and a half, but we started thinking of that and refining that somewhere in the year 93, and by 97 I would say we had all of those elements in place. And interestingly, all of those same elements are still there. If you come and see us on a live show, the thing you feel in your gut is the bass pedals, and then you will notice when the kind of distorted clean guitar combination comes in and so forth. So basically, I would say once we were established enough as musicians, after getting started and kind of getting the basics together, we started thinking of what would be us in more refined way. And it took us a couple of years to find it, but after that it has been pretty much kind of a fine-tuning and refining that rather than more dramatic changes to it.
Okay, thank you. That's a very interesting and detailed answer, because I was going to question next about the use of the keyboards, because indeed that's a very, I think that's a very unique aspect of skepticism, the prominence they have in the music. But another interesting point is that I've seen in past interviews you've said that although the sound is very unique, when you started composing and doing your own stuff, you didn't have the specific intention of creating something new, spawning a new genre, doing something revolutionary. You simply followed your artistic instinct, right? And can you talk a bit about this process? Like how does this work?
Well, yeah, it's kind of when you think of we were looking at this poster just a moment ago, which was I'm looking for that picture right now to be able to explain it better. It's so probably on the year 92 in March we were playing a concert in Riihimäki with Afflicted, Xysma, Disgrace, Necropsy. On that show I was still playing guitar. On that show we played the song The Everdark Green, which later became the last song of the debut album. So that song was written for two guitars. And then when you think of that song and how is it really kind of executed for the album, it's very, very organ driven. So kind of what we were doing, we were writing songs that we felt good about. Then when the switch in the lineups happened, we adapted what we had for that lineup and kind of wanted to go deeper and deeper into what our own sound would be. So if you think of it from this point of view, the idea of creating something genre defining, for example, wouldn't really cross our minds. We were just trying to write the best song we could, and that's what we ended up with.
I see. So the best song we could, and the song that reflected you the most, right? Reflected your essence, your artistic essence the most.
Yeah. Also, in those kind of it was quite organic, so we never kind of really had the kind of explicit talks on kind of what should the band be and should we do this or that sort of thing. It's just kind of we just rehearsed really, really a lot, like 4 times a week, and kind of just kind of massaged the ideas until they were the best we could get. So kind of I don't know if you meant it like that, but kind of when you say artistic essence, it kind of it sounds kind of like it's something big and serious. At that time, we were kind of 16, 17 year olds who really loved underground death metal, and kind of something also worth mentioning perhaps is the culture, kind of seeing like-minded people from around the country come around with plastic bags full of beer and kind of we are the same tribe. So that was kind of it would of course be great to say that well we were driven by a kind of a artistic vision. We partially were, but also it was kind of driven by the kind of passion to just to create our own thing as young men.
I see. So another aspect that is usually stressed about your music is that it's very atmospheric. So when you're composing a song, do you have a certain ambience in mind? Like, do you try to create an ambience?
It's kind of we sometimes describe it that the music is quite visual, so kind of not meaning that how do we look like performing it, but kind of there are oftentimes kind of strong visual metaphors for the things in the music, and when we write the songs, we often discuss the kind of what is this song about, what is this part about, and what would this look like. So kind of we tend to discuss the music with visual terms, if you know what I mean. So kind of more than kind of what the ambience is like. Like for example, the song Passage on the new album, it's kind of after the initial riff of that thing, when the song kind of takes off, what we discussed while writing is the kind of, it's kind of like driving on carriage of kind of 4 horses in a thunderstorm through mountains. So you can kind of hear the lightning strikes, and it's kind of simultaneously frightening and exciting, and kind of you won't know whether the next lightning will strike you or the next tree, or will there be another lightning strike. So we have that kind of visual anchors to the discussion that we have while we write the song. So in that sense, I think that can somehow be heard in. So kind of also one word that tends to come up a lot in reviews and interviews is the word dramatic. I don't know, did you use that as well? There is kind of a certain kind of dramaticness into the music, for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I just kind of was about to add that I don't know why, but the dramaticness is there. Yeah, your turn.
Well, I'm very glad that you bring up the visual aspect, because I agree. Ever since I started listening to Skepticism, I think there's a very almost cinematic aspect, and in a sense that's what I tried to say when I talked about the ambience. I mean, creating a world, with the music, creating an environment, and that includes images and visuals as well. So I'm very glad that you brought this up. And speaking of the reviews that you mentioned now, another descriptive that people usually attach to Skepticism is the depressive. People usually say that it's depressive music, but I myself, even though I can see what they're trying to say, I think that there's also this depressive side is also complemented by a triumphant and epic side. So is it something that you intend, like making an equilibrium?
It's kind of interesting. After one show, I got negative feedback from the singer myself, and he said, "Eero, you should smile less on stage." And I smiled because playing certain songs that some might can describe as dark or depressive is simply enjoyable. And kind of, I've been saying this several times in several occasions, but I'll say it again. For me, playing music like this is an aesthetic choice. So it isn't depressive. It isn't kind of even sad to me. It's kind of this kind of music is what's beautiful to me. And in that sense, kind of playing it, writing it, isn't a depressive or kind of that sort of process at all. It's just kind of enjoyable, and one could even say empowering. That might be partially because, well, the Finnish heritage. The Finns like their music in the minor scales, starting from Sibelius and so forth, or not even starting from that, but earlier. So in a sense, kind of, it might feel depressive for many, but for me, it's purely kind of how would I define beauty in music? I would say slow, dark, minor scales.
Oh, it's interesting that you bring up Sibelius, because another thing I was very interested is that the fact that in Finland, indeed, in Finnish art, there seems to this melancholy seems to be a very prominent aspect, not just in composers like Sibelius, but also, for example, painters like Hugo Simberg. Not sure if I
Yeah,
pronounced his name correctly.
yeah,
And so
that's correct.
I was curious about, do you get inspiration from these national artists like Simberg or others?
Well, actually, now that you asked, I personally, first of all, like Sibelius a lot. He has really,
Mm,
really good and kind of uh, the sort of music that strikes you deep. Um, those national artists, kind of, for me, there's for example this guy called Akseli Galleen Kallela who painted a lot of Kalevala inspired stuff for the National Museum and so forth. Stylistically, I don't like that so much. They're
mm,
okay, but those guys, like 100 years ago, they called it the golden age of the Finnish art. They were really, really interesting people, and their thinking and at that point when things that we take for given, like for example, that we know that spiritism isn't true, but that those people are moving the boat themselves. But at that time, there was no science to back that up. So those artists were kind of searching for the truth or the higher truth and whatnot, and it was the kind of the very time when the kind of traditional world was coming crumbling down, and Nietzsche told everyone that God is dead and so forth. So I wouldn't say the art of those artists is inspiring, but I've been reading about those people, the artists, kind of how they thought and uh, how those ideologies of that time was seen in their art. So I think that's fascinating. But there is one piece of art that did inspire me specifically for the companion album. There's a Finnish painter, I think he painted in the 60s, 70s maybe, called Kalerva Palsa, who had a painting that I can't translate the name properly, but it's it could be called The Couple or They Are Together. And there's a picture of the artist and another character. And I've liked the painting for a long time, and that was one of the things that directly inspired me in writing the lyrics for the song The Intertwined. I can show you the painting later so you'll have an idea what's it like. But I wouldn't say that leaning towards those artists would be normal. But yeah, there are really fascinating artists in Finland, and the melancholy is quite common in that. So we do get that in the mother's milk, in a sense.
mm. Oh, very interesting. And another interesting topic that you bring up, those artists, not just in Finland, but at that time there was, when you mentioned, I found it interesting when you mentioned these traditional beliefs, because many of those artists were connected also to folklore or to the supernatural. I think looking at those paintings, that's something that we instinctively recognize, the supernatural, this aura of something from the beyond. And I think that in some albums of skepticism, like Stormco Fleet, just to give an example, I also think there's kind of a spiritual aspect to it. So what can you say about that? Like a mystical aspect.
Yeah, I would agree. Then defining what exactly that is a bit more difficult. So something that's been there for all of the albums and all of the lyrics is that it's they're trying to avoid statements in a sense that they would be exactly this or not that. So kind of there's spiritual music like connected to a religion, for example, and our music isn't like that. But on the other hand, there's the kind of the experience of the unknown or the mystical or the supernatural or whatnot, whatever, however you describe it, seems to be something that mankind has had since, well, since as long as we can track down. And regardless of what do you focus that interest into, I think it's an interesting aspect of humans that they kind of somehow feel the craving for something bigger than us, and then what kind of forms it takes throughout the centuries. Uh, kind of earlier on, I was really interested in kind of the uh, old religions in Finland and northern, like Nordic countries as a whole. Kind of how did those ancestors of ours look into that area? And it's kind of some of that can be probably heard in the early albums, but I would say the kind of my general interest into the idea of why do we humans feel the unknown is so important, and why do I as a person actually feel that as well. So that fascination can probably be, at least in the lyrics, uh, maybe somewhat in the music as well.
I like the expression that you use, the unknown and the attraction towards the unknown. That I agree, it's always been with mankind. And this just reminded me of another interesting aspect, because I know that many metal bands at that time were inspired, for example, by the writer H.P. Lovecraft, which dealt a lot with this question of the unknown. Was it also the case with you?
It actually wasn't. I hadn't read that stuff at that time, so kind of I was trying to actually remember what I had read. Uh, we were, of course, as teenagers with the death metal thing going on, we were looking at underground splatter movies and all that on VHS cassettes, and read horror novels with that. So kind of yeah, I wasn't reading any of the kind of uh, the common mystic names like Lovecraft or Crowley or whomever, but I was looking deeply into the Norse kind of stories, the Edda and that sort of stuff, and then the Finnish folklore and the ancient faith the Finns had. So I was more leaning towards that than the kind of the, let's say, Western tradition of mysticism, maybe.
Okay, that's very interesting. And now that we're talking about influences, I've seen that in other interviews you have stressed the importance of nature. For example, in this we were talking about man-made things. We're talking about other music and painting, but nature, that was also something that influenced you. And do you think that, for example, I think Finland has a very characteristic type of nature and of landscape? Do you think that if you weren't from Finland, if you were born in another country, the music might have turned out differently?
It's kind of hard to say.
Well, yeah,
Of
it's
course,
always an hypothesis, right?
yeah. And you will take your environment as given because, well, you're born to it and all that. And kind of, as we discussed earlier in this talk, that kind of the Finns like their music on the minor scales. But on the other hand, there are really kind of heavy and dark bands from other countries. And when you kind of think of, for example, from the UK, Esoteric, they have a really strong characteristic sound. From the US, Evoken, again, a really kind of big sounding band and so forth. So basically, would be great to get to say that, well, Finland is all around the sound and it would be different. But on the other hand, I think this sound, this kind of music could be written anywhere. Um, so maybe the nature and the Finnish tradition kind of helped us shape it into the exact form it is. But still I would say it isn't the kind of a if you think of like country music, so basically if you live in Texas, it might be easier to make it if you kind of hear it daily while driving your pickup truck. You might get into the mood better, but in the sense of this kind of a rare-ish extreme metal, I think you could write this in South America pretty well.
Okay, so now that you mentioned these other artists, I'm curious about, do you keep up with newer music like metal, or do you listen to new releases, for example?
Not so much as I used to. It's kind of it oftentimes goes so that someone recommends something really interesting, and sometimes it has been metal. I tend to go to metal shows with the guitarist a couple of times a year, just to kind of keep up with what's going on. And sometimes there are new metal bands, but more often lately it has been more on the classical and ambient side of music. So, for example, the album is called the Disintegration Tapes. I've been listening to a lot while walking and so forth. So, kind of I'm not so on top of what's happening in metal now than I used to be. But on the other hand, I kind of do listen to more and more varied music now than I used to. So, kind of some people who are really into vinyls and such are kind of against the streaming services, but I personally like them because they are convenient. So I can easily find practically any album I've ever bought on CD, and I can listen to it while having a walk, which I do a lot. So that has been a kind of a good turn in my music listening habits in the past couple of years.
And could you give us some recommendations now that you mentioned that you've been listening more to classical and ambient? Could you give us just a few recommendations in those areas?
Sure. First of all, I like stuff by Philip Glass a lot. He's a popular composer, and kind of my go-to thing is an album called Glass Organ, which is of course his songs arranged for the pipe organ. That is it's kind of a collection of different kind of things, but it's especially efficient if you put that on when you are at a place where there's a lot of people, and suddenly all the rush goes away. That's really good. Then there's well, I don't know, new, but there's an interesting Swedish artist called Anna von Hauswolf, who's doing kind of classical ambient-ish stuff that involves pipe organs and synthesizers and stuff, and it's really, really inspiring to listen to. It's kind of when you take any kind of pipe organ recording, it's generally going to be like the kind of basic classical stuff that really talented people made 300 years ago, but it's kind of sounds like as unique as a pizza. So this artist is kind of like different, has a different way of using the organ than anyone else I've heard. So it's really interesting. And then the third one would be those disintegration tapes. And so the idea there is that the composer has a loop of physical tape that's beginning to be in a pretty bad shape, and it plays until it wears out. So every rotation it gets a bit worse and worse until it doesn't play anymore. That's really melkein almost kind of a thing I hope I would have figured out myself. Yeah, I had to check while talking. So it's disintegration loops, not tapes. And the composer is William Basinski. And that's how it goes. As you see, I don't even remember the name of the composer because, well, the phone does.
Okay, so thank you a lot for those. And when you were talking about Philip Glass, that took me to another thought, which is Philip Glass is also very known from his soundtracks, right? And in the beginning, you were talking about a while ago. You were talking about the splatter, the gory movies that you watched when you were younger. And this brings me to another question, which is: does cinema and soundtracks still play an important role for you? And do you think they affect some of what you write, or not so much?
Well, it was just yesterday in this very room where I'm sitting at, and we were testing speakers with a friend, and the guy went on to play stuff by Hans Zimmer, and it was just kind of closing your eyes and having that monumental music play. You could see things. So in a sense, I haven't been watching a lot of movies lately, but kind of you could even say that the music for movies is a genre of its own, and it's really impressive in a sense. Though, so kind of when we discussed earlier that there's kind of a certain dramatic aspect to skepticism, it's probably somehow related to that. So there's some same kind of dramaticness in the music as there is dramaticness into kind of cinematic music.
Okay, so we've drifted a bit now. We're talking about these outside influences, but going back to when we were talking about the composition, when we were saying about that Skepticism's music is actually varied. It's not just the darkness; it also has triumphant moments. I think that in almost every sound of Skepticism, for every dark moment, there is a more luminous counterpart. So this begs the question: when you're composing a song, do you try to make it like a narrative or like a journey for the listener with a beginning and an end?
It's kind of a way of writing songs is kind of such that we are kind of like building a tower of parts. So we start from something, and then we add the next thing, and then the next thing, and if it quite doesn't work, we take the last one or the two last ones away and put something else in there, and go back and forth like this until we are happy with it. And in a sense, we don't explicitly ever discuss kind of whether these parts form a meaningful whole or whether that creates a specific kind of journey. It's somehow kind of what's complete for us. It's kind of probably implicitly so that we want the parts to be like that. So kind of I just, now that you asked, I probably only came to think of this for the first time myself, but in a sense, kind of, I remember from my day job at times, kind of, we were making a project, and kind of, what is the minimum we need to have this as a complete thing was the question. And for me, it was much more than it was for some others. So kind of, I wanted to kind of really all the smaller parts to have an impact on the whole and so forth. So basically, in a sense, what is completing a song to us is probably that it feels dramatically right, even if we don't explicitly discuss that while doing it. But that's probably kind of why looking back throughout the back catalog, our songs are quite consistent, and they're not kind of dramatically different types, even if they are, of course, not all similar, but kind of in a sense that probably the consistency in our songwriting comes from that.
Okay, and another point I would like to go back to is when we were talking about the music being, in a sense, empowering. So do you think that in Skepticism's music there is an element of sort of a purge or a catharsis? Like, for example, when playing live, do you feel that?
I would say I very strongly do. And kind of also something I want to try and phrase again from the earlier is that kind of it's actually those dark parts and the heavy parts that are really, really pleasing and empowering to play live. So kind of it isn't like dark parts and empowering parts, but kind of the heaviness and the darkness of the music is what makes it empowering for me. Of course, it is also so that some of the songs or riffs or parts sound more uplifting or even happier than others. Like when I think of on the new album, the opening track "Color" is not so very dark. It's more like kind of hopeful. So that happens, of course, as well. But kind of the I think in many genres it might be a good idea to balance between kind of a heavier and lighter parts and darker and happier parts. But we are not kind of trying to do that, or kind of for me personally, the dark parts aren't the dark parts, but they are the dark parts are the pleasing parts.
Okay, that makes sense, because I think that for the listeners, for myself, or for example, I think many listeners of Skepticism also feel this effect, this purge and the catharsis. And another unique aspect of Skepticism sound that I wanted to discuss is the vocals, because I think the vocals also play some role in this cathartic effect. And in the beginning you were mentioning, it was quite an interesting story. You would say that you just picked the vocalist because he had a strong voice, and
Yeah.
but eventually, like the whole band sound, the vocals also became something very, very characteristic, very unique. And I feel that in many times, I'm not saying that the lyrics are not important, but in many moments I feel like the vocals are almost like an instrument. They're there mostly to create texture. So can you talk a bit about this? How did you eventually get to this? Did you establish this style of vocals with a singer?
Yeah, well, I do fully agree with you. It's in many cases the vocal is more of an instrument. So basically, in most genres, you will kind of mainly listen to the vocal and kind of if the lyrics are something you can kind of relate to, then that's for the better. But for us, the vocal is more an instrument. Also, it's interesting that I think that the singer always when I see him on stage, I think that, well, this is the place where that man is at his best. So kind of if I believed in creation, I would say that is what the man is made for. Uh, but kind of what I mean by that is simply that it's kind of a performing live is where he can show some of the strongest parts of his personality. And if he never joined a band, never came up with his own style of vocals, he couldn't do that. So in a sense, if you think of a live situation, it's kind of his role is partially to kind of create the icing on top of the sound and somewhat act as the master of ceremonies as well to kind of bring the whole thing together. So yeah, and of course his exact style has evolved over 30 years. So if you listen to the first album, the vocals are much more whispery in that, and but also you can recognize him from that voice. So it's kind of a, or if you haven't talked to him, he has a really deep voice naturally as well. So yeah, I would agree with your findings, and that's roughly how it came about.
Okay, and speaking of the band dynamics, now we're talking about the singer and how he acts as the master of ceremonies. Another thing that's quite an impressive feat that you've managed as a band is how you've maintained the lineup for 30 years.
Yep.
And so I imagine that all the proceedings in the band, like coming up with ideas, writing, the production, all of that must be extremely organic by now, because it's been 30 years, all the same people. So I imagine that the dynamics, the personal dynamics, must be really set in stone. So is that how it is?
Yeah, it is easier now, of course, as we've done it so many times together. Also, what is easier is that kind of as 20-year-olds we were much edgier, so kind of finding out at the studio, like which of these three good options on, how do we do that echo for that end of that part. We would have really different opinions, and kind of we would spend time discussing between several valid options, which wasn't really useful in a sense. So we spend less time on that now. But still, what I was happy to see from the reviews of the new album is that kind of, if you would lose touch and start creating mediocre songs that are just a repetition of what you did earlier, you wouldn't notice it yourself. So in that sense, it appears that we've managed to learn how to spend less time arguing about something less important, and still kind of be able to maintain the quality in the songs. So that's one. Also something that turns up at times is that kind of we've been doing this for a really, really long time, and I think things would be much, much different if half of the lineup would have changed, or even more. So kind of the commitment to this vision of the band and keeping it going would be far lower. And of course, it hasn't been always easy. Kind of 30 years, when you think of, we are all fathers now, and there are a lot of twists and turns in one's lives. So, and well, of course, it would be also fun if there were not any personal disagreements ever either. So it's kind of one could describe it as that we've been doing it for so long that we are not kind of friends anymore. We are kind of like brothers, and everyone who has a brother knows that those relationships aren't straightforward always and peaceful always. But anyway, still, I'm really happy that we've got it going, and kind of somehow it hasn't been boring or repetitive as kind of a participant personally for once. So it's kind of every weekend normally I'll drive to Riihimäki for the band practice, and somehow when I sit at the organ I feel at home every time.
Okay, thank you for this explanation, because indeed I think this is a particularly interesting aspect about the band, because despite those disagreements that you talked about and that you say are totally natural for even for brothers, it's still a very, the idea that I get from what you say, it's that it's overall it's still a very smooth dynamic. And I say this because there are many bands that are very chaotic in their lineups. They are constantly changing. So I imagine that must be very difficult for the members when they're always changing. They have to be constantly adapting to the new people, to their ideas, their sensibilities. And so, like you said, with skepticism, that has been reduced to a minimum, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we've had a couple of session members, like for example the previous album Ordeal, we had a live guitarist there because, well, we wanted that album to be only what you play live, and normally in a studio album, like in the case of Companion as well, we will double and triple and quadruple the guitars. So the session guitarist was there for the album and for the live shows for the next year and a half maybe, and then he dropped off again. So basically the core of the band has been the same for 30 years.
Okay, and what about the more industry aspect, releasing albums, labels? Can you talk a bit about that? Your relationship to the music industry, and what your thoughts on that?
Well, kind of when you think of things from a realistic point of view, skepticism operates in a niche of a niche genre, so there's practically no business to it. So as I said earlier, it's a lifestyle to us, and we've been fortunate enough that we've had a recording deal throughout the career, so we get the albums out. Nowadays you wouldn't even need that, you could release them yourselves, but still thinking of all of the small things like how do we should we make different colors of vinyls and how do we get them distributed. It's really good to have a label. So in that sense, we did the first albums with Redstream, then Redstream stopped the music releasing, so we moved to Swart Records for Ordeal and on. And well, from our point of view, well, or even in a smaller scale, from my point of view, for me it's important to get to write, release new music, and make sure that everyone who wants to listen to it gets to listen to it. So we did some work on that as well this year. So now the entire back catalog is available in streaming services. We are getting the rest of the back catalog on vinyl and CD again. So again, anyone who would like to have a physical copy could have a physical copy, and so forth. So of course there are kind of ongoing discussions on, like for example, how the royalties coming through from the streaming services are not fair and all that. I do agree there are problems in that, but in a sense, when the scale for skepticism is such that we are not even trying to ever make it a source of income for the members, we can simply focus on kind of making new music, performing it later. Of course, the pace will be slower than it would if it was a full-time job, but it's also kind of when the idea is that this is a lifestyle, it also, when the pace isn't too heavy, it won't burn you out so quickly. So I truly do hope that we get to still celebrate the 60th anniversary of the band with live shows.
Okay, that's quite a goal, right?
Yeah, and well, funnily enough, when we were those kind of 15-year-olds riding bicycles to band practice with a guitar in the other hand, wearing black t-shirts, so kind of someone said for fun, like kind of it would be kind of cool to keep doing this when we are 60 and grey. Well, we are not 60 yet, but we are getting grey.
Yeah, exactly. And now that you got back to the to those times, like you said, when you were talking about the beginning, you said that you really felt this strong connection, this strong sense of belonging to the community, that drive, like you said. I think that expression says it all.
Yeah.
And now you said that, of course the times have changed, and you don't feel that so much kinship with metal, and you don't keep up with the new releases, but still from what you might observe, do you have any comments on the current scene, so to speak?
Well, actually, I wouldn't fully agree. When I walked into the venue where we performed last Saturday, and there were the metal crowd with the metal T-shirts and spikes and leather and stuff. I was like, well, the tribe is alive. So in a sense, even if I'm not actively following uh, week by week, what's the hot new artist now, it's getting into the metal events still kind of is heartwarming to see that, well, the tribe does exist still. And I would say I've been to more general music festivals as well, as a spectator. I think there's something very unique even to large scale metal festivals still. So you have the roughest looking audience who are the nicest people. Like for example, in Finland, there's a Tuska Metal Festival, and I think the lifetime time amount of uh, times that police has been called there because of a fight is zero. And when you think of how the metal crowd looks like, it's just the aggression and the pain is in the music, and those events are really really cool. So I think that still exists, and kind of for me the underground and belonging is more in the people you meet in person. So uh, I kind of at the point where the underground moved into the internet, that might have been say turn early 2000s or something like that. I didn't get or become active there at that point. Somehow it didn't feel like the same going into a underground gig with a bag of beer, wearing your favorite band shirt, versus having a nickname on the internet, arguing about whether this or that is better. It didn't have the same thing for me. So in that sense, in the modern internet underground, I'm not so into that, but still I always feel certain kind of delight in my heart when I go into a metal event, be it a single show or a festival, and see the crowd, see the people.
So it's an environment where you feel comfortable.
Yeah, yeah, it's uh, it somehow reminds me of kind of a tribe emerging from different places, so that you see
Mm.
individual people like that in a crowd, and it doesn't stand out. But then when you have a festival full of those bunch of people, it's really impressive.
So I think we've covered quite a lot of different aspects and important ones. So do you want to add some finishing remarks?
Hmm. Well, I think we did cover a lot already. So maybe you heard in my answers quite a bit that there has been quite a bit of reflection going on lately,
Mhm.
and hopefully it doesn't mean that we'd feel that it's over now. Somehow it has been healthy to look back and think of why things happened. Um, but yeah, thanks again. Your questions made me think of some things from a new angle, like you saw in the answer. So very good talk.
Okay, and once again, thank you for accepting our invite.